it and think about it, I've already committed to obeying before I even know the answer to the question. He says, when you get to that point, in all your ways you're acknowledging me, don't you worry. I'll make it evident to you. I'll make your path clear. I'll make it plain. Listen to this quote. Listen to this quote. This is a great quote from Thomas Merton. We'll put it on the screen for you. Look at this. It's kind of long. Don't try to write it down, but this says it better than I could say it. We receive enlightenment only in proportion as we give ourselves more and more completely to God by humble submission and love. See, the enlightenment follows the surrender. We do not first see and then act. We act. That is, you do what you know to do and then see. And that is why the man or woman who waits to see clearly before he will believe never starts on the journey. In other words, if you're at the place in your life where you're saying, God, I'm not sure I want to do your will, but I want to know what it is. God, who created you and loves you, says, I'm sorry, I just don't play that way. That's not the game I play. But if you'll trust in me with all your heart, if in all the other areas of your life that you do know about, you acknowledge me, then I'll make you a promise. I will make your path plain, clear, obvious. You won't be able to miss my will if your life depended upon it. You see, it's surrender to the known will of God that paves the way to discovery of the unknown will of God. It's surrender and obedience to what we do know that sets us up to be able to discern what we don't know. And one of the frustrating things, and we're going to talk about this next week, one of the frustrating things I know for some of you is you're brand new to this whole thing. I mean, again, you're so new and you think you want to know God's will, but every time you discover some of His will, you think, whoa, I could never do it, and I couldn't do that either. I mean, this is kind of extreme. And so the whole idea of getting to the place where you're acknowledging God in all of your ways before you can hear from Him is such a frustrating concept. But here's what it's about. It's about growing, as my friend did, I shared a few minutes ago. It's about growing in your faith and growing in your obedience. And as you grow and as you mature and as you're able to come to the place where you say yes, 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 before God even, asked the question, at that place you'll be able to discern and know God's will for your life. Now, next week I'm going to give you a shortcut, okay? So hang with me. Next week, for those of you who've just got to know now, we're going to talk about that. But here is God's general way. Here's the path. Here's what God generally is up to. He wants to bring you and me to the place to where we are so humbled before Him and so neutral that the answer is yes before He even tells us what it is He wants us to do. That's the goal. And when you get there, you will not miss God's will for your life. You know what I've discovered, and some of you can identify with this. Broken people have a very easy time discerning God's will. Do you know what I mean by broken? People who, because of circumstances, because of decisions they've made in the past, people who are at the end of their rope. I mean, they have messed up so bad, they're saying, God, I don't dare make another decision without you, because every decision I've made has resulted in chaos and turmoil. Every relational decision, it didn't work out. My financial decisions didn't work out. My family decisions. I'm at the place, God, where I'm afraid to do anything because I've made such a mess of my life. People who are at rock bottom and they're broken. It's easy for them to say, thy will be done, because my will is always a disaster. It is amazing how easy it is for people in that situation to discern and to know God's will. I've met people who are brand new Christians that God was so clearly guiding and directing, it was almost spooky. But the reason is because they were at that critical place where they were saying, God, I'm not asking for consideration. I'm not asking for information. My answer is yes. Now just please show me what it is I'm to do in this situation. Do you know why it's so hard? God makes it sort of this cat and mouse thing. I mean, there's part of me that wants to go, look, if my kids came to me and asked for direction, I'm not going to go, well, do you know what normally I do? And have you heard all the, I would just answer the question, why does God make it such a, needle in the haystack thing? Well, part of it is the whole process of what God's doing in our lives. That God is more interested in you discovering Him than He is in discovering His will. Did you know that? The ultimate thing for God isn't the information. Should it be black or white? Is it Detroit or Atlanta? Is it move in, move out? I mean, those are details. The ultimate thing for God is in the process of discovering His will. He wants you to discover Him. And what those of us who've known Him for a long time know for certain is that God has our undivided attention when we're trying to make a decision, doesn't He? I mean, your prayer life is like it's never, it's an all-time high when you're trying to make a decision. I mean, when in 3 weeks you got to know, by next Thursday you got to know, the opportunity is going to go away in a week if you don't know. I mean, nobody has to say, well, you really ought to pray. I mean, that's all you do is pray. And in the process of trying to know His will, the truth is we get to know Him. And ultimately, that's what God is after. It's in seeking to know His will that we get to know Him. And I think ultimately God leverages that process for all that He can so that when all is said and done, our faith grows, and when our faith intersects with His faithfulness, we fall on our knees, either literally or figuratively, and say, wow, what a great God, what a great God, what a great God He is. That's what He's ultimately after. In his new book, Philip Yancey says this. It's a great quote. I'm going to keep it on my desk for a while. Look at this. He says, I do not get to know God and then do His will. He says, I get to know Him more deeply by doing His will. Isn't that great? I do not get to know God and then do His will. I get to know Him more deeply. What he's saying is this. It's in the process of seeking God's will that God opens Himself up to us in ways that we never would anticipate. And at the end of the process, don't miss this, at the end of the process, we haven't simply made a decision. At the end of the process, we know our Creator. At the end of the process, our faith is increased. At the end of the process, something just hasn't happened out there where the decision was made. Something happened in here. Because in the process of seeking to know His will, we've discovered more and more and more about Him. There's the providential will of God. God's going to do it anyway. There's the moral will of God. Most of us already know enough about that and have a hard time keeping up with that. Somewhere within those guidelines, somewhere within those guardrails, somewhere within those boundaries, God has a plan and a purpose and a direction for your life. And the more familiar you come through His Word with what He's up to in this world and what He's going to do anyway, and the more familiar you become and the more obedient you become, and the more you acknowledge Him in all of your ways in the area of your morality and your purity and your ethics and how you treat your family and how you do at work and your employees and all those practical things of life, the more sincere we are and the more surrendered we are there, the more knowledgeable we are here, it becomes easier and easier and easier for us to discern His will for our life. Now, let me tell you the best news of all as we conclude. Listen, God created communication. That makes Him the greatest, what? Communicator. When He's ready for you to know, you can't miss it. There's no place I know of in Scripture, unless I've just missed it, there's no place I know of in Scripture where somebody said, what? Do what? Did you understand what he was talking about? See, the problem isn't that they didn't understand. The problem is they just didn't want to do it. Listen, when God is ready to communicate, you can't miss it. And His timing is always perfect. And the best preparation you can make for hearing from God isn't spending prolonged hours on your knees trying to get real quiet and the next thing that pops in my head will be God's will. I used to do that. Did you ever try that? And it's like, pizza, or just, stuff pops in your head. Listen, God is a much better communicator than that. His ways are much clearer than that. And the best preparation you can make is to become familiar with what He's going to do anyway and get your life in line with what you know to do. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. And here's the promise. And He will make your path plain. He will make your path straight. Because He wants you to know His will more than you even want to know it. And in most cases, He's waiting for us to get neutral enough to say, God, here are my options, but I want your will more than I want either of the options. God, I want your will more than I want to stay in Atlanta or move to Michigan. I want your will more than I either get married or don't get married. God, I'd like to get married, I don't want to, but God, I want your will more than I want any of the options. In all my ways, I'm acknowledging you. I'm trusting in you with all of my heart. And God says, you're where I want you. You're where I want you. And I'm going to make the way clear. I'm going to make it obvious. Because I'm more interested in you knowing my will for your life than you are yourself in knowing it. Isn't that a great promise?